Hey there, tonight we're stepping straight into the actual Wild West. No polished saloon doors, no spotless white hat heroes, just dust, danger, and a daily fight to stay breathing. Think you could hack it? Stick around and find out why most modern folks wouldn't last past sunrise. If stories like this hit the spot, tap that like or smash subscribe. It keeps these adventures rolling more than you know. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from, so drop your city and local time in the comments and let's watch our little map light up. Now, kill the big lights, cue up a quiet fan for that nighttime hum, and settle in. We're about to discover whether you could survive a single day on the unforgiving American frontier. Congratulations, your eyelids just cracked open in a sod roof shanty somewhere on the high plains, spring of 1872. Good news first, you're about to star in the origin story of 1,000 Hollywood westerns. Bad news, Hollywood left out the part where the very air tries to kill you before you've swung your legs off the tick-stuffed mattress. The smell arrives like a slap. Not crisp pine or meadow breeze, but a rancid stew of sweat-cured clothing, horse droppings baked onto boots, sour milk, kerosene, and the contents of last night's chamber pot steaming in a corner bucket. Bathing happens here the way birthdays do, maybe once a year, if the water barrel is full and the wind is warm enough to keep you from turning into an icicle. In dry months, every ladle is rationed for drinking, so folks figure a little stink beats a long thirst. You sit up, straw crackles beneath the thin ticking, and a regiment of bedbugs retreats toward the seams. Every joint whines like a rusty hinge. Frontier life is manual labor on nightmare difficulty, hauling 60-pound water buckets, turning prairie sod tougher than boot leather, swinging a pick in half-light tunnels. Nobody talks about ergonomic posture. Spinal discs compress until even 20-something ranch hands walk with permanent stoops. Physician ledgers from the period list lumbago as routinely as they list births. Winter mornings bite hardest. Your breath fogs indoors, and the iron stove is cold because fuel disappeared weeks ago. You pull on the only shirt you own, canvas stiff with last month's sweat, and denim trousers crusted white at the knees with dried salt. Women fare no better, layering camise, corset, and wool skirt that soaks up mud like a wick. Clothes get laundered when rain, free time and extra soap miraculously align, meaning almost never. Your stomach issues its first complaint. Breakfast options: beans slow cooked in yesterday's bacon fat, a heel of hardtack you soften in weak chicory coffee, maybe a strip of salt pork you'll chew like jerky. Fresh greens vanished with the first frost, apples rotted in the barrel weeks ago. Vitamin C deficiency loosens gums all winter, so a blood-flecked toothbrush isn't unusual, assuming you own a toothbrush. Boot inspection is mandatory. Shake out scorpions, black widows, or the occasional prairie rattler curling in the toe for warmth. One unlucky misstep means a venomous bite and a 30-mile wagon ride to the closest doctor if the horse hasn't been sold for feed grain. Speaking of doctors, infection still outranks bullets as the frontier's favorite reaper. A rusty nail through your boot can spiral into gangrene. Treatment is an amputation performed on a plank table after 2 gulps of rye. You step outside and meet the horizon, an endless brown ocean barely interrupted by fence posts and distant cottonwoods. Beautiful, yes, until you remember that blizzards, hailstones the size of fists, and tornado funnels can appear faster than you can saddle a horse. Barometers are luxury imports. Forecasting is done by staring at the sky and hoping. Civilization seems safer, so you ride into town. The main street is unpaved earth trampled into slurry by hooves and wagon wheels. Summer dust storms here are thick enough to hide a 2-story hotel. Spring rains turn the avenue into boot-sucking muck. Horse manure piles reach toddler height near hitch rails, each one humming with flies that ferry dysentery from outhouses to stew pots. Saloons provide the only social gravity. Forget swinging bat-wing doors and polished mahogany bars. Picture a warped plank counter, cracked mirror, and lanterns smoking the ceiling black. Bourbon label says Kentucky, but the bottle holds raw grain liquor laced with pepper juice and a dash of lamp oil for color. 2 shots of that stuff and even a mild insult can ignite a firefight. Showdowns aren't choreographed duels, they're ambushes launched from barstool distance, and accuracy suffers under the influence. Ironically, many towns enforce stricter gun rules than modern open carry zones. Signs on the outskirts of Abilene order visitors to check firearms with the marshal. The rule cuts gunfights in half, but knives and fists make up the difference. Lawmen are few, one sheriff, maybe a deputy, and jail cells double as storage when cattle drives surge. If hardware or horseflesh disappears, a posse handles justice on the prairie. Rope first, questions never. Need supplies. The general store stocks everything from pickaxes to penny candy, but freight costs triple the price. A tin of peaches might drain a whole day's wages, and flour barrels arrive crawling with weevils. You sift out the bugs and bake anyway. Mail rides in twice a month, weather permitting, so news of your cousin's wedding back east turns up after the first baby is born. Loneliness here weighs more than the feed sacks you sling. Diaries describe prairie silence that drives grown men to the bottle and women to nervous collapse. By midday, the sun climbs high enough to boil sweat through shirt cloth. You still need to mend fence, draw water, and butcher a chicken before dark. Tonight you'll swallow smoke over a pine pitch lantern, jot maybe 3 lines in a journal, if your hands stop shaking, and crawl back onto that straw tick while coyotes serenade the stars. And that was only day 1. Tomorrow promises the same routine plus surprises. Perhaps a hailstorm, perhaps a tooth abscess, perhaps a stranger at the door shouting for whiskey and bandages. Whatever arrives, comfort never will. Out here, survival is earned one brutal sunrise at a time, and you've just cashed your first painful paycheck. As you look at the sky, you see clouds mass on the horizon. There's your next adversary rolling in. Prairie sky is a liar. 1 hour, it glows the serene blue of a summer postcard. The next, it drops a hail barrage that rips shingles and skins cattle. You scan the distance, see nothing. Lower your guard, and that's exactly when the twister touches down behind the cottonwoods. Tornado sirens won't exist for another century. Barometers are rarities. Your only warning is a sudden stillness, a pressure in your ears, and then a roar like a locomotive lit on fire. By the time you sprint inside that sod house, walls of prairie turf stacked like bricks, roof of pollinated grass, debris is already flying. Sod walls hold better than you'd think, but leak dirt into your hair while the storm claws at the roof. Summer heat can be worse than wind. A stretch of 105-degree afternoons bakes corn into popcorn before harvest. Your skin cracks, livestock pant heavy, water barrels drop inch by inch. Without shade or refrigeration, milk curdles in minutes. Meanwhile, winter arrives like a debt collector. The mercury free falls to -20, stove wood dwindles, and you consider burning the furniture. Feet wrapped in gunny sack sweat, then freeze. Frostbite claims toes, ears, sometimes whole limbs. Unlike the modern world, you can't dial for rescue. If your neighbor 10 miles west even hears your panicked bell, snowdrifts 5 feet high trap him at home. The weather alone could end you, but you still need a sack of flour, nails, and kerosene from the nearest settlement. And that settlement is a hazard all its own. Imagine a main street the width of 2 wagons, lined with clapboard buildings slapped up so fast they already sag. Mud in spring covers boots to the ankle. Dust in summer coats lungs, horse manure piles where it drops. Over the saloon doorway hangs a sign promising whiskey, but the bottle holds raw grain alcohol colored with chewing tobacco and cut with kerosene to stretch the batch. One swallow scorches your throat, numbs your tongue, and might fry optic nerves if you're unlucky. Violence sprouts wherever liquor flows. Most folks carry firearms, but not for high noon theatrics. The gun is a tool, same as a shovel, and arguments erupt like prairie fires after 4 shots of tar-grade booze. Quick draw contests are a fiction. Real gunfights start sideways at arm's length, someone shoving another into the bar, pistol yanked point blank. Alcohol, pride, and boredom make a lethal cocktail. Tombstone and Dodge City enforce strict handgun check-ins. Yet even there, the local paper's crime blotter reads like battlefield dispatches. Sometimes lawmen are as mean as the men they collar. Sometimes the badge is swapped for a deck of cards when the salary dries up. And if a bullet or knife lays you open, you stagger 2 blocks to the doctor's office, which is little more than a back room behind the apothecary. The smell in that room makes the street seem fresh. The physician, a generous title, owns a bone saw, a bottle of laudanum, and a medical college diploma mailed from somewhere you've never heard of. Anesthesia means someone pours cheap whiskey until you can't stand. Sterilization means wiping the sore with yesterday's towel. Germ theory is still an argument in scholarly journals. 1,500 miles east. Out here, invisible killers are shrugged off as bad blood. If infection sets in, the solution is more whiskey. Maybe mercuric chloride pills that slowly poison your kidneys, or a poultice of mashed onions and lard. Women die in childbirth so often midwives keep a pine coffin partly built, just in case. When a miner's leg snaps under a cave-in, amputation happens fast. Tourniquet, saw, red-hot iron to cauterize. Survival is coin flip luck. Family watch, praying fervently, because prayer is free and everything else costs hard cash. Herbal remedies sometimes work. Willow bark for fever, echinacea for cough, but dosage is guesswork. Patent medicine salesmen rattle into town with elixirs promising to cure female weakness, consumption, and melancholy. Ingredients: opium, cocaine, camphor, plus a slug of alcohol. Folks line up with dime coins and hope salvation comes in a bottle. Sometimes it does, pain stops at least, but addiction begins. You decline a swig. Smart. Now you just need to leave this town before dusk, because the road ahead is long and night travel risks bandits, wolves, and worse. You hitch a ride with a wagon train heading northwest, drawn by oxen slower than sin but stronger than horses. The trail stretches 2,000 miles, a ribbon of dust etched by thousands before you, each leaving scraps of broken axle and spilled grain for proof. Pioneers call it the nation's longest graveyard. Historians estimate one traveler dies for roughly every 100 yards of distance. You read crosses: Baby Martha, 4 months, Thomas Reed, age 37, lightning. The threats are mundane yet merciless. A loose hoof crushes a skull while coupling teams. A child falls beneath a wheel. River crossings flip wagons into icy currents. Flour dissolves, rifles sink, people drown under canvas. Cholera rips through a caravan at terrifying speed. Healthy at breakfast, corpse by campfire. At night, wagons form a corral circle, but not to fight Indians who mostly trade and guide anyway. The circle pens livestock and psychologically pens fear. Wolves prowl, sniffing cookpot drippings. Someone fires a warning shot. Adrenaline spikes, no one sleeps. As days blur into weeks, you learn to mend harness. Hunt prairie chicken with one shot. Pitch a canvas lean-to against hail. Muscles knot, nails blacken, sunburn cracks, hair crawls with lice, and always the miles. So many miles the Rockies seem a mirage growing no closer. Some wagons turn back, some push on, and graves bloom like bone-white flowers in the tall grass. But suppose you beat the trail, suppose you crest the last ridge and glimpse the new valley. You survived, technically. Your body, however, is a ledger of unpaid debts, malnutrition, chronic pain, parasites, trauma. Now you must build a life from scratch in soil that doesn't care whether you've nearly died to reach it. Even if nature, bullets, and bacteria spare you, invisible battles rage in head and heart. Isolation weighs pounds heavier than saddle iron. Prairie madness isn't folklore. Diaries record settlers wandering into blizzards, convinced voices called their name. Mothers speak of crushing sadness, weeks without adult conversation, funerals where they bury a child at dawn and milk. Decows by dusk because life allows no pause. Alcoholism blooms like fungus. So does violence behind cabin doors. A secret seldom reported but obvious in court records of territorial judges. Social divides slice communities like bad barbed wire. Mexican landowners who farmed river valleys for generations find deeds overruled by US courts. Chinese rail crews, after blasting tunnels through granite, watch foreign miners' taxes erase their wages. Black cowboys ride as expertly as any, sometimes better, yet rarely see their names printed on cattle brand certificates. For native nations, the frontier story is one long theft, bison herds slaughtered, treaty lines redrawn, children seized for boarding schools that slice language from tongue. Amid these conflicts, small kindnesses flicker. A barn raising brings neighbors miles apart to lift rafters before storm season. A Comanche scout guides a wagon party to water in exchange for flour and coffee. An Irish fiddler plays reels beside a US cavalry drummer, and for one night music outranks grievance. Still nothing resolves fully. The frontier is a pressure cooker, forging myths as fast as it breaks bodies, and it's inside that myth, polished, simplified, exported to theatre playbills back east, that your modern mind first learned the word cowboy. The reality you've tasted today, that was edited out. The sun slumps low, a red coin dropping behind cottonwoods. You made it to dusk, technically. You're blistered, half deaf from wind roar, belly punching itself with hunger cramps. Clothes rank enough to stun a skunk. Your grip shakes from exhaustion. Every creak of the cabin wall sounds like trouble. Tomorrow's chores: mend fence, butcher hog, haul 6 buckets, already line up like prison guards. But the biggest shock: you are by 19th century standards still lucky. Disease hasn't opened your veins. No hailstone fractured your skull. Bandits skipped your wagon. In the arithmetic of frontier risk, that's a jackpot. Look around: no sterile clinic, no weather app, no stocked grocery aisle. Comfort is scarce, peril routine. Lifespans average half your modern expectation. A single infected blister can rewrite destiny. That's why the place was called wild. Not because it bred glamorous gunfighters, but because every element, earth, sky, beast, human, refused to guarantee tomorrow. So ask yourself, of all today's modern luxuries, which would you beg to smuggle back? Antibiotics, air conditioning, maybe just reliable hygiene and a salad bar? Drop your answer in the comments. And the next time you watch a cowboy ride into golden sunset, remember how many real riders never lived long enough to see that final frame. Thanks for taking this brutal ride. If you're still reading with pulse steady, hit like, hammer subscribe, and share where you're watching from: town, country, time zone. The global campfire burns brighter each time a new voice joins the circle. For now, snuff the lantern, pull your hat low, and hope morning comes. Out here, dawn is never promised. Prosperity in the west flashes like a struck match, brilliant for a heartbeat, then gone. One season a mining camp erupts with silver fever, saloons packed shoulder to shoulder with men waving fresh banknotes. The next the vein runs dry, and those same bills can't even buy a cup of thin coffee. With no national banking standards, every distant town prints its own paper money, each bill backed only by confidence in some shaky storefront bank. Confidence, of course, is the first thing to evaporate. A bartender pinches your dollar, squints, and decides it's worth half what it was yesterday. By dusk, the only safe transactions involve bartering 2 buckets of flour for a pair of horseshoes, a worn saddle traded for winter potatoes. Pockets stuffed with paper still rumble when the stomach is empty, and that lesson spreads fast. When cash collapses, order tends to follow. Out on the open range, a single sheriff might be responsible for a territory larger than a modern state, and by the time his horse pounds into a campfire circle, the guilty party is often swinging from a cottonwood branch. Pauses form on rumor, trials last minutes, and guilt is determined by whichever voice yells the angriest. Newspapers back east wring their hands over vigilante excess, but out here the math is brutal. A rope costs less than a jail and never needs feeding. Travel offers no refuge from this rough arithmetic. Stagecoaches that promise civilization jostle passengers over axle-deep ruts, courting bandits at every blind bend. One startled horse, one cracked wheel, and the coach tumbles into the arroyo like a crate of dishes. Railroads feel safer until a boiler explodes or warped rails send carriages accordion folding into splinters. Survivors drag themselves from twisted iron only to find their miles from water, bleeding into dust that doesn't care who owned the ticket. Even a campsite far from rusted rails isn't peace. The real killers move quiet, scorpions nesting in boots, rattlesnakes warming beneath bedrolls, mosquitoes carrying ague that chills bones for months, a stray dog with rabies licking dishwater at dusk. On rare occasions the threat roars, a grizzly upends the supply wagon with a swipe that feels like an axe made of fur and muscle, but most danger arrives the way nightmares do, softly, while you think you're safe. And if beasts spare you, fire may not. Western towns are built of tinder, sun-dried boards, cedar shingles, kerosene lanterns, coal stoves. One careless elbow tips a lamp, and suddenly an orange wall gallops down the street faster than any horse. Volunteer bucket lines strain and stumble, flames hop roofs, chew warehouses, and leave nothing but chimneys thrusting skyward like scorched monuments. Merchants who lose their stock lose their hope as well, writing shaky letters home by the glow of embers that were once their livelihoods. Long-term harm is quieter than fire, spreading in creeks turned copper-brown by mine tailings and slopes denuded by hungry saws. Mercury rinses through sluice boxes, cyanide seeps into groundwater, and carcasses of bison litter the prairie until the bones bleach white and crack. Timbermen ride east with profits while the naked hills they leave behind slide loose in spring rain, burying cabins and dreams alike. The word conservation is an Eastern curiosity. Here resources seem limitless, right up to the moment they're gone. Amid this churn of boom, bust and hazard, frontier women shoulder loads that would buckle many men. Before sunrise she is kneading bread, by noon she's hauling 50-gallon water barrels or sewing a neighbor's scalp after a hatchet mishap. At dusk she nails shingles back onto the roof, peeled away by last night's gale, all while an infant dozes in a sling at her side. Laws grant her few rights, but necessity grants her authority. When a flash flood hits, folks follow the woman who knows which ridge won't wash away. The suffrage pamphlets won't arrive for years, but anyone watching knows the vote is already earned. Children grow up in this forge without the luxury of childhood. A 10-year-old boy drives a plow team. His 8-year-old sister pieces quilts that might be the only thing standing between the family and frostbite. School, if one exists, squeezes every age into a smoke-stained room for 3 winter months. Lessons share time with the crack of the teacher's hickory switch, and disease patrols the aisles. Measles, diphtheria, whooping cough. Tiny coffins along the fence line mark the roll call. No parent forgets. Yet even here, sparks of joy refuse to die. Saturday night fiddles soar out reels until floorboards hum. Barn raisings end in feasts where venison stew steams beside wild plum pies. Harvest fairs pit pie against pie and horse against horse. Wagers laid with laughter as currency. A clear night can paint the prairie sky with shimmering curtains of green, and under that glow cowboys trade tall tales so outrageous, everyone knows they'll sound even better tomorrow. The knowledge that disaster waits just beyond the lantern light sharpens every note of music, every gulp of strong coffee, every breath of cool dusk, and then, inevitably, word drifts east. Journalists with clean cuffs and easy chairs compress all of it. Blood, sweat, bedbug bites, bison bones into tidy columns about heroic sheriffs and villainous outlaws. Dime novel writers substitute tidy gunfights for chaotic ambushes, transform exhausted mothers into coquettish damsels, and scrub the mercury from the drinking water. A generation later, Hollywood adds technicolor sunsets and orchestral swells, polishing the raw frontier into a myth America can cheer for. But under the celluloid shine the original ledger remains, fortunes lost, lungs scarred, rivers poisoned, children buried, and a question whispered by every crumbling headstone: was the gamble worth the price? The prairie nights, for all their grand silence, seldom allowed deep sleep. Coyotes set up a midnight chorus that ricocheted across the flats, owls shouted warnings from cottonwoods, and the wind flirted with the roof plank seams until every draft felt like a cold fingertip on the back of the neck. Families lay awake, counting the seconds between wolf howls and the distant clap of a drunken shot, praying none of those stray echoes belonged to trouble heading their way. Because darkness arrived with real teeth, the humble flame became a kind of tether to sanity. Candles were precious, hand-dipped from tallow that smelled faintly of slaughterhouse, or else improvised from twists of cloth floating in bacon grease. A single lantern had to chase shadows from the supper table, illuminate a mother's sewing, and guide a father's pen as he balanced ledgers no bank would ever certify. The guttering wick measured every evening, and when the flame surrendered, the family surrendered too, curling beneath quilts as the cold pressed in. Sleep, in truth, was an armed truce rather than a peace. Mattresses stuffed with straw hatched whole civilizations of lice. Bedbugs crept from crevices the moment breathing slowed. A scorpion might claim the warm cave beneath a blanket seam. Most mornings began with a quick inspection, bites counted, stings treated with chewed plantain leaves, bedding dragged out to thaw in the hard sun. Little wonder dawn devotionals drew full attendance. Anyone who opened both eyes alive felt obligated to thank somebody. Religion stitched far-flung neighbors together more reliably than any territorial charter. Each denomination rotated preaching duty in the only building large enough. One Sunday a Methodist circuit rider, the next a Lutheran farmer reading from a borrowed missal, and twice a year perhaps a rabbi or Buddhist sojourner who happened to be freighting goods along the stage road. Faith gave shape to weddings and burials, but it also justified barn raisings, quilting bees, and hymn sings that let overworked hands rest on shared hymnals rather than axes. When sermons fell short, folk medicine stepped in. A poultice of mustard seed pressed against the chest promised to chase pneumonia. Skunk grease simmered with onions was rubbed onto frost-bitten toes. Spider webs packed into a gunshot wound were said to check bleeding. Patent medicine salesmen zigzagged dusty roads with painted wagons touting elixirs of opium, alcohol, and sassafras, each bottle vowing to cure female weakness and snake bite alike. People bought hope by the ounce because conventional doctors, scarce as rain, charged fees measured in acreage. News of genuine breakthroughs, like antiseptic surgery or the new German vaccine for anthrax, traveled by telegraph, the electric heartbeat that leapt from pole to pole faster than any horse. One tap of the key in Cheyenne could announce a gold strike or a governor's recall to St. Louis within minutes. But telegraph offices opened only in towns prosperous enough to afford the wire, so settlers living 50 miles out relied on neighbors riding fence lines, a packet of messages stuffed beneath a saddle flap and passed hand to hand until it reached the click-clacking desk. Those scraps of information were expanded, sometimes distorted, by the weekly newspaper, a single broadsheet crammed with Eastern editorials, poems clipped from Boston journals, territorial ordinances, and advertisements for plowshares or runaway mules. People pored over every inch, debating typos as if the misprint itself were a sign of looming fortune or disaster. Months-old war bulletins still felt urgent when they described cousins or countrymen fighting on some other frontier half a continent away. Politics followed the mail in slow, halting steps. Town charters written by candlelight could outlaw gambling 1 month and legalize it the next if a louder vote turned up at the saloon meeting. Territorial legislatures convened hundreds of miles from the people they governed. By the time a tax law reached distant ranches, cattle prices had shifted, and the statute already felt outdated. In that vacuum, local strongmen, mine bosses, cattle barons, railroad attorneys, drafted their own small constitutions enforced by hired muscle and iron rails. Water more than gold or ballots dictated daily survival. Settlers bored wells until the handle refused to pull another dribble, and then prayed summer thunderstorms would refill the cistern. Drought turned neighbors into rivals overnight. Fences inched farther across creek beds. Gun barrels appeared at crossing points. A few intemperate shots at dusk decided whose corn patch would live until August. When cloudbursts finally arrived, buckets, barrels, and dishpans lined the eaves to catch every drop as it drummed through holes in the sod roof. All that water, once captured, had to keep food edible through 9-month winters. Root cellars gaped beneath nearly every cabin, earth-walled pantries, cool enough to stall rot, but dry enough to avoid mold. Carrots layered in sand, onions braided into ropes, apples packed in straw, crocks of sauerkraut sealed with pork lard. Each preservation trick was another square on the calendar of survival. When jars clinked half-empty by late March, hunger began measuring the daylight. Too many cloudy days in a row, and belt notches tightened. Clothing wore out with a relentlessness that astonished city visitors. Canvas pants faded to parchment, wool socks sprouted toes, leather boots split into yawning smiles. Hide tanners ran smokehouses behind the livery stable, treating cow skins with oak bark or urine, while women swapped patches like playing cards, searching for a scrap of denim that matched the knee blown out during spring branding. Nothing was discarded until every rag became quilt, batting, or potholder stuffing. If cabins felt claustrophobic, cards offered escape. A grease-stained deck might entertain a bunkhouse for an entire winter. Faro Monte, stud poker where a month's wages changed hands on one busted flush. Honest gambling dens posted house rules, but no one expected honesty to last past the third drink. Sharpers stacked decks with mirror-polished fingernails, and a hidden derringer under the table often settled disagreements faster than the dealer's call. Language in these rooms was a patchwork. You might hear Norwegian curses, Irish drinking songs, Chinese counting rhymes, and Kiowa harvest prayers inside the span of a single hand. Misunderstandings were inevitable, but necessity built strange dictionaries. A Mexican vaquero and a black freedman trailing the same herd could improvise an entire cattle drive vocabulary from half-learned Spanish, prairie sign language, and shared laughter. Music made translation easier. A cheap fiddle or battered concertina traveled better than a piano and instantly rearranged social boundaries. Saturday night reels persuaded Swedes to stomp alongside Scots, Germans to clap time for creeks. When the bowstrings snapped, someone rolled an empty flour barrel beneath a blanket and beat it like a drum while others whistled harmony. The rhythm outlasted grievances, at least until sunrise chores resumed. Every few months an itinerant photographer rattled into town with a big box camera, glass plates, and bottles of collodion that smelled like lighting in a jar. Families scrubbed children's faces raw, borrowed clean shirts, and queued beneath a paisley backdrop nailed to the blacksmith's wall. The resulting tintype froze a moment of fragile pride, pale eyes squinting into the sun, coal-used knuckles clutching a borrowed shotgun, proof for relatives back east that the frontier hadn't swallowed them whole. Weather remained the trickster overall. Some settlers swore by the height of ant hills to forecast winter, others by the width of a pig's spleen. A few bought brass barometers at great expense, only to learn that a sudden low reading sometimes meant tornado, other times just a blustering prairie squall. Folks eventually trusted the ache in old bullet wounds and the way swallows hugged the ground at dusk more than any ticking instrument. As rails crept farther out, odd gadgets appeared: safety bicycles with solid rubber tires, kerosene cookstoves boxed in slatted crates, even a few hand-cranked sewing machines that multiplied a woman's output threefold. Each invention promised ease, each required cash and freight that only the most prosperous could risk. The majority kept mending by lantern and walking behind plows because reliable improvement always lagged behind advertising. Winter arrived like a slammed door, sealing the high plains under drifts that swallowed fences. Families dug shallow trenches from cabin to stock shed to avoid losing their way in whiteout blizzards that erased the entire world beyond an arm's length. Oxen froze standing, and sometimes the only fuel left was twisted straw or dried sunflower stalks a child had gathered in August precisely for this moment of desperation. Mortality kept pace with the wind. When sickness or accident claimed a neighbor, the community fashioned a coffin from green boards, lined it with a quilt someone could scarcely spare, and carved a name into a cedar shingle. Burial took place before the ground hardened entirely. If frost won the race, the body was stored in the root cellar until thaw. Tombstones were rough cut or non-existent, yet visitors could find graves easily, guided by lone cottonwoods festooned with ribbon, or by the melody of hand-cranked hymn boxes left to turn with the prairie breeze. Through all of it ran a stubborn certainty that tomorrow might, against all evidence, be easier. Each letter from a cousin in Oregon City hinting at apple orchards, every railroad timetable promising cheaper freight, every rumor of a new mill, kept lanterns glowing after midnight. The frontier never rewarded patience evenly, but it did reward persistence often enough to trap the hopeful in its long gamble, and that hope, flickering like tallow against the dark, was sometimes the strongest force on the untamed horizon. That stubborn hope often rode on the backs of cattle stretching to every horizon. Twice a year the open range erupted into a thunder of hooves as cowboys nudged thousand-head herds toward railheads hundreds of miles away. Days were heat and dust, nights were jittery half-sleep broken by sudden stampedes set off by a lightning flash or the snap of a twig. When the herd finally funneled into the stock pens at Abilene or Dodge, drovers collected wages that felt princely until saloon floors, gambling tables and bathhouses siphoned away every coin by dawn. Drives poured money into trail towns, but they also poured trouble. As cowhands flooded the streets, respectable families shuttered windows while dancehall girls hoisted bright skirts under gaslight chandeliers salvaged from steamboats. A pianist pounded out polkas crisscrossed with Mexican ranchera, and within the same tune fists flew, whiskey sloshed, and someone always reached for iron. Marshals posted tin signs threatening jail, yet their own tempers sometimes shortened after a bottle or two, blurring the line between lawman and gunslinger. Farther into the hills, miners chased veins of quartz that glittered like fairy fire inside candlelit tunnels. Each new strike birthed a canvas shanty town, claim office, assay shack, blacksmith, and obligatory saloon, growing so fast surveyors drew maps after streets already existed. Around every campfire rumor traveled faster than the ore wagons. A deeper pocket here, a mother lode there. Most men spent months blasting and shoveling only to haul out rock worth less than the candles burned to find it, then drifted onward with pick handles worn flat and lungs already frosting with silicosis. The lucky few who wrested bullion from those mountains met another adversary: freight tolls set by pack train contractors and nascent rail syndicates. By the time gold dust reached a Denver smelter, fees for guards, wagon repairs, and 5 separate territorial duties claimed almost half the weight. Yet even that robbery felt kinder than the scales inside city assay offices, where a pocket worn thin by travel might leak grains enough to erase a week's labor long before the clerk poured the dust into a crucible. As mineral madness ebbed, abandoned diggings became ghost towns overnight. Tumbleweeds rattled through plank sidewalks, doors swung on one hinge, and claims name markers bleached beneath high country sun. Families who had arrived chasing fortune left wagons behind and hiked out on foot, too broke to stable horses. Deserted piano frames twanged when winter gales barreled down slopes, playing dirges no human hand intended. The lonely soundtrack for deer nosing through crates once labeled dynamite, handle with care. Not everyone followed ore or cattle. Timber crews hewed ponderosa pines in mountain gulches, driving logs down spring rivers that rose like brown avalanches. The flume riders, sinewy men balanced on wet trunks, jabbed pikes to keep jams from crushing whole towns along the valley floor. Sometimes a log rolled wrong, pinning a leg. Rescue meant sawing the timber or the limb, whichever yielded first. Fresh-cut boards fed track gangs, mine shorings, and distant piano factories east of the Mississippi, but the stumps they left behind never grew as quickly as rail schedules demanded. Rails themselves sliced the prairie like seams, stitching remote stations to Chicago's grain pits and New York's trading floors. Steam whistles heralded futures measured in days instead of months, yet the right-of-way often ran straight across homestead wells and burial mounds. Survey stakes hammered into sacred ground sparked midnight raids that twisted rails, and crews awoke to find locomotives derailed at creek crossings mysteriously flooded by cut embankments. Capital answered with armed guards, multiplying tensions that neither treaties nor share prices bothered to reckon. Into that uneasy mix came immigrant labor, thousands of Chinese workers laying ties across high deserts. They ate rice and dried fish shipped in cracked jars, brewed tea laced with ginger to guard against mountain chill, and stacked granite so precisely engineers swore it had been measured by spirit level. Local papers mocked queues and chopsticks while quietly admitting no other crews matched their speed through dynamited tunnels. When paydays shrank, the Chinese cooked stone soup until coins resumed, but prejudice never softened in the pot. Black cowboys rode point and drag on the same trails, their songs, part field holler, part Scots-Irish fiddle cadence, echoing across moonlit herds. Though they broke mustangs and tamed rivers like any wrangler, their names rarely reached payroll top lines. At some railheads owners refused bunkhouse beds, so these men slept under the stars they'd followed north from Reconstruction chaos, tracing constellations older than ranch brands. Oral tradition kept their stories alive even when ledgers did not. On the sheep ranges a quieter war simmered. Wool growers fenced hillsides with woven wire that cattle barons swore choked both grass and water. Night riders loped in with kerosene torches, burned fence posts and scattered bleating flocks. Retaliation arrived with Winchester repeaters. Territorial judges convened pauses, but verdicts blew away like wool tufts on canyon wind, because jurors raised beef themselves and valued open-range theology above formal statutes. Amid these turf feuds, mail-order catalogues fluttered onto homestead tables like invitations from another galaxy. Illustrated pages promised cast-iron stoves that baked bread in half the wood, parlor organs to civilize Sunday evenings, or even pre-cut houses a rail car could deliver in numbered crates. $20 down, the ad claimed, and comfort would rolling pin its way west. Payments often outlived the companies that issued invoices, leaving settlers staring at a debt for goods that stalled in a flooded rail yard and never cleared the rocky passes. Letters themselves traveled by myriad hands, stage drivers, pony express riders before the telegraph, even passing tribes who agreed to carry packets in exchange for coffee and tobacco. Envelopes bore candle-soot cancellations and stamps steamed off for reuse. Ink smeared, corners tore, and perfume traces mingled with axle grease, but words survived, testament of births, deaths, and imagined reunions anchoring hearts to places they might never see again. Social life tilted around county fairs when autumn cooled the fields. Livestock pens gleamed with brushed hides, quilts fluttered along fence rails, pies steamed beneath cheesecloth judging tents. Rivalries brewed strong, whose corn weighed heavier, whose mare cleared the hurdle faster, but the night ended with lanterns strung like new constellations and a brass band urging dancers across sawdust underfoot. For a fleeting evening, strangers found common ground in the taste of kettle corn and the boom of fireworks banging against canyon walls. Education eked out a foothold in one-room schoolhouses scented with chalk dust and kerosene. A single teacher juggled phonics for 5-year-olds and algebra for teens in the same plank rows. When blizzards buried the front door, older boys tunneled out with shovels so the lesson might continue, because arithmetic promised ledger accuracy, and accurate ledgers promised survival. Each June a closing ceremony awarded paper certificates pressed between catalogue covers, cherished like deeds to a wider future. When sickness overtook a district and parents feared the school bell's echo, quarantine flags fluttered over cabin doors. Scarlet fever could silence whole valleys in weeks. Families hung sheets soaked in vinegar across windows and prayed the red rash stopped at the property line. A travelling nurse, sometimes a nun, sometimes a freed woman trained back east, carried carbolic acid, willow bark powder, and the ruthless grace to admit when neither would suffice. During lulls between crises, storytelling bridged long twilights. Grandparents summoned memories of revolutionary muskets, Haitian sugar fields, Irish potato blight, or Yoruba masquerade dances, threading them into prairie context so the young could taste the vast world hiding beyond buffalo grass horizons. These tales mingled accents and folklore until even skeptics swore coyotes might be trickster spirits wearing fur to test human resolve beneath the moon. Entertainers smelled opportunity in such hunger for narrative. Medicine show wagons unfolded into makeshift stages where jugglers flipped torches and pitchmen hawked snake oil liniment that supposedly cured both rheumatism and heartbreak. After the torches dimmed, locals replayed the spectacle around stoves all winter, half believing the elixir might still work if only they'd bought 2 bottles instead of 1. Larger spectacles followed the rails: Buffalo Bill's troupe trick-shooting sharpshooters, Lakota horsemen reenacting battles compressed to 5-minute thrill rides. For some spectators, the show was the only time they'd see a woman fire a Winchester while galloping side saddle, or watch indigenous riders loop a lariat around targets without breaking stride. Posters shouted romance, history whispered complication, crowds left humming both tunes at once. Back at isolated spreads, engineering improvisation ranked alongside livestock care. With no blacksmith in 30 miles, a broken plowshare meant forging replacement from wagon tire scraps heated in a stone hearth. A jammed windmill gearbox was disassembled, greased with tallow, and reassembled on a ladder of lashed fence rails. Children learned early that curiosity kept hinges swinging and pulleys turning. Break it in order to understand it, fix it in order to eat. For spiritual reprieve, some sought sweat lodge ceremonies with native neighbors, exchanging hymn verses for cedar smoke and drum beats that spoke a language older than survey lines. Others chased solace in mesmerism circles, table-tapping seances, or mail-in astrological charts promising to foretell blizzard cycles. Faith pluralism was less ideology than pragmatic insurance. Stack enough prayers, charms, and chants. Something might stick when hail pummeled seedlings flat. Legal infrastructure limped after expansion. Traveling judges, circuit riders, hauled law libraries in carpet bags, convening court beneath cottonwoods when no hall stood. Jury benches were hay bales, gavel strikes echoed off saddle pumps. A verdict reached today might reverse next year once a proper courthouse existed, but litigants accepted uncertainty over fistfights that ended alliances permanently. Artistic urges squeezed through every crack. A ranch hand carved cedar figurines during night guard shifts, selling them to stage passengers for coin. A Swedish midwife wove rye straw into intricate hats copied later by Chicago milliners. When sheet music arrived, pump organs groaned through Beethoven simplified for 3 fingers, yet the chords soared across prairies as triumphantly as any symphony hall performance. Tradesmen grouped into mutual aid lodges, masons, odd fellows, colored knights of Pythias, each promising small insurance payouts hours when a member fell ill or a barn burned. Secret grips and passwords flourished, partly for solidarity, partly for the thrill of mystery in a land where most secrets blew away in the wind. Widows relied on those treasuries to buy seed wheat or bury a husband felled by a renegade wheel rim. Animal husbandry innovations crept westward too. Barbed wire patents multiplied, each barb shape boasting superior deterrence against longhorn hooves. Vaccination guns, spring-loaded syringes, promised to halt Texas fever if ranchers dared the upfront cost. Even so, a wet summer could still drown calves in low washes faster than medicine saved them. When summer heat broiled soil into cracked leather, insects rose in black clouds. Grasshoppers darkened midday skies, chewing fence posts after exhausting all vegetation, their rasp a sound colonists compared to hail hitting tin. Desperate farmers lit backfires and dragged canvas hopper dozers smeared with coal tar, pushing the contraptions like lawn sweepers to capture millions of twitching bodies later shoveled into trenches and burned. Amusement sometimes arrived by accident. A traveling balloonist misjudged thermals and drifted over the plains, drawing villagers who had never imagined a human could float above clouds. They followed the shadow on horseback until the contraption sagged into a wheat field, then helped patch silk tears with muslin flour sacks, sending the aeronaut skyward again amid prayers and whinnies of astonished mules. Climatological chaos offered bleak entertainment of its own. Dust devils pirouetted across alkali flats, miniature tornadoes lifting hats sky high before slamming them yards away in laughter-tinged disbelief. Children chased these whirlwinds until a parent barked warning, playful funnels sometimes sharpened into sandblasting terrors that stripped paint from wagons and left skin raw. As decades ticked on, whispers of women's suffrage drifted west. Wyoming Territory granted the vote first, partly principle, partly ploy to draw settlers, but the effect rippled. At spring elections, a few ranch matrons trudged through slush to cast ballots, startling officials more than any six-gun strapped low. Their presence rewrote the civic landscape as surely as graded streets and telegraph poles. Cuisine also evolved, where earlier tables bowed under beans and salt pork. Irrigated truck gardens eventually coaxed lettuce, beets and even strawberries from a mended loam. Chili peppers seeded by Mexican vaqueros spiced trail stews. Chinese gardeners near rail camps introduced bok choy and snow peas. Quick to adapt, settlers layered newfound flavors into biscuit dough or boiled them with hominy, creating dishes no cookbook author back east could have predicted. Wildlife patterns adjusted in parallel. Pronghorn herds skirted freshly laid rail beds, coyotes grew fat on stray calves, and passenger pigeons, once darkening the sky in endless flocks, dwindled within a generation to rumors. Hunters who had boasted of barrels filled with birds now questioned whether abundance could vanish while still in living memory, a sobering lesson carried forward into debates about fur seal rookeries and salmon runs. Banking evolved from satchels of gold dust to brick buildings with brass teller cages, even if those buildings sometimes rested on shaky ledgers. Panics back east toppled frontier institutions overnight. Locks clicked on vaults investors would never open again. Depositors scrabbled through ash piles after suspicious fires, hoping silver coins fused in crucibles could still buy feed corn. Meanwhile, the frontier press flexed its influence. Editors doubled as mayors and land agents, printing glowing prospects for the latest town site while quietly owning half the plotted lots. Hyperbolic headlines might lure a wave of newcomers, boosting ad revenue, but a single harsh winter scoured illusions, leaving paper skeletons blowing across main streets wide enough to turn a team and wagon with room to spare. Photography advanced too. Dry plate negatives reduced exposure times, letting mothers capture toddlers before curiosity scrambled them from the frame, though developing chemicals remained finicky. Traveling darkrooms converted wagons blacked out with tar paper, processed plates beside creeks where clean water was handy, and it wasn't uncommon for silver nitrate runoff to stain trout pools metallic purple. Sports gained traction in settled pockets. Baseball diamonds laid out on sun-bleached buffalo wallows hosted 9-inning contests where fielders dodged cow pies and cacti. Bets ran high, pride ran higher. The sound of a cracked bat rolling across sagebrush became proof that a rough land could learn civility without surrendering spectacle. Yet the most profound change came when children who had never known any world but this one began leaving for colleges in distant cities their parents pronounced like foreign capitals. They wrote home marveling at electric lights, asphalt and streetcars, then debated whether to return to dust and stars or splice prairie independence to urban opportunity. Each decision braided the West deeper into the nation, until frontier and republic were no longer two edges meeting but one continuous fabric stretched from ocean to ocean. By then the old legends were already hardening like plaster casts, simpler, cleaner, easier to repeat than the mess of lived experience. But in kitchen whispers and crumbling journals, a more intricate tale endured, the one carried in these 30 vignettes, a chronicle of labor and improvisation, of songs over stampedes and lanterns against long winters, of ambition evaporating at sunrise and stubborn hope rekindled by sunset. That untamed cadence thrummed in every floorboard and fence staple, reminding whoever cared to listen that history seldom rides in a straight line. It loops, doubles back and leaves deep hoofprints for future dreamers to puzzle over long after the prairie grass closes above them.